Welcome to Let's Talk Criterion, and in this edition we take a look at the French director Jean Eustache's film The Mother and the Whore, coming to the collection in Blu-ray and 4K UHD. Jean Eustache is a French director, writer and editor who made comparatively few films during his career and only between the years of 1966 and 1980. His first film was a short film of just 47 minutes, Le Père Noël a les yeux bleus, translating as Santa Claus has blue eyes. His last film was in 1980 called Offre d'emploi, Job Offer, but his career was cut short. I'll explain more about that later. His most famous film was much longer, clocking in at 218 minutes, La Maman et la Putain, or The Mother and the Whore, starring Jean-Pierre Léaud, Bernadette Lafont and Françoise Lebrun. And it examines the relationships between three characters caught in a love triangle. It was actually his first full-length feature and is considered to be his greatest work. Eustache wrote the screenplay himself, inspired by his own relationship, and shot the film from May to July of 1972 on a budget of only 700,000 francs. Now, prior to making this film, he had considered quitting the business altogether, doubting his career had any longevity at that point. He was considered one of the key directors in the French New Wave, La Nouvelle Vague, like many of his contemporaries at the time. He cast his friends Jean-Pierre Léaud and Bernadette Lafont, and also his ex-lover, Françoise Lebrun, who was a student of literature and had never acted on screen before. Barbette Schroeder lent him the money to make the film, and he spent 3 months writing the screenplay and drawing on his own personal relationships. One, of course, with Catherine Garnier, and Jacques Renard's character in the film was based on Eustache's friend, Jean-Jacques Schul. Now, he decided he was going to use no actual musical score in the film. Instead, he relied on natural sounds punctuated by music, played on records by the characters in the film, and that included songs from Deep Purple, Edith Piaf, and Marlene Dietrich. The title of the film, The Mother and the Whore, well, that refers, of course, to Marie, that's Bernadette Lafont, whose status as a 30-year-old marks her as effectively middle-aged to her modestly younger peers, and Veronica, played in the film by Françoise Lebrun, a hospital nurse who copes with the tedium of her experience with casual sex. Now, these archetypes of female behaviour aren't reflective of the film's own views, but those of Alexandre, played in the film by Jean-Pierre Léaud, a disaffected young intellectual who lives with Marie and is increasingly drawn towards Veronica. Alexandre meets up with his ex-girlfriend, played by Isabelle Weingarten. Speeding past any attempt at reconciliation, Alexandre proposes marriage, and then proceeds to rant about her new relationship, asking if she does the same things with her new beau that they did together. Alexandre maintains an outward veneer of calm, but cannot help but keep the venom out of his voice. And no sooner do the two part ways than Alexandre catches his first glimpse of Veronica and immediately gravitates towards her, much to the chagrin of Marie, who occasionally sleeps with the young man but feigns indifference to this new interloper. The frictions caused here by this lopsided love triangle propels this film that consists of little more than dialogue about spiralling jealousy and male presumption, much of which was inspired by Eustache's own life and a similar romantic entanglement that ended tragically. Now, though the film is devoted to reproducing real characters and events and lasts over 3.5 hours, it isn't an undisciplined or unselective ramble. Rigorously structured and shot in 16mm that was blown up to 35mm, the film deliberately aims for a documentary look while qualifying as a particular reading and interpretation of certain events. As the critic of The New Yorker at the time, Pauline Kael, noted back in 1974, it took 3 months of editing to make this film seem unedited. Now, each sequence begins with a fade in and ends with a fade out, creating a ghostly overall texture that seems inseparable from the film's complex relation to nostalgia. Now, this nostalgia comes in several layers, all of them tinged with irony. Perhaps the most important layer relates to the 1940s. Alexandra's unnamed friend has a fetish for Nazi paraphernalia, such as a book about the SS and a record, which prompts Alexandra to lament being born after the time when girls swooned over soldiers, the so-called prestige of the uniform, he sighs. The same friend capriciously steals someone's wheelchair, probably a paralytic in fact, with all the amused amorality of a Gestapo thug. And the climactic shot focuses on a bereft Marie as she listens to a lovely Edith Piaf song, Les Amants de Paris, which was recorded in 1948. Now, the actor Jean-Pierre Léaud was 29 when he made The Mother and the Whore in 1973, but judging by the film, he seems much older than his actual age in the film, not so much in his looks though, but in a deep world weariness that is partially covered by a raging libido. Now, playing the story's protagonist, Alexandra, the actor speaks about the recent past as though it took place decades ago. For Alexandra, May 1968 was only 5 years ago, but he lumps it in with the end of the German occupation in World War II. Although his politics are rather conservative, he is constantly sneering at feminism. Alexandra sings the praises of the 1960s, a time when the Black Panthers, the Cultural Revolution, the Rolling Stones and May 68 all seemed to be part of one big liberating phenomenon. Now, during Eustache's 1977 docufiction entitled Une sale histoire, its protagonist quotes the Marquis de Sade to the effect that sexual pleasure lies first in hearing and then in seeing. The director spent much of the last few years of his life speaking to strangers on phone chat lines, with the intention of turning these stories that he'd heard into future scripts for films. Much of what he produced was a much more polite and less sexual version of the voyeurism in women's bathrooms. The Mother and the Whore, however, is a torrent of words that runs non-stop for almost 4 hours, reportedly based on tape recordings that took place between Eustache and his various lovers. Now, one American stereotype of French cinema claims that it spotlights sex-addicted Parisians sitting in cafes talking about their love lives. The Mother and the Whore takes this accusation to its utmost extreme. And the film has an early reputation of being an example of right-wing backlash to the counterculture, and many of the film's defenders value a work that they strongly disagree with, at least politically. And it is true, Eustache gives up the ghost on the liberating potential of the left really quickly, and the second half of the film serves up a scathing treatment of the sexual revolution itself. Still, it is doubtful that the director shares the viewpoints of his actual characters. The painful incoherence of Veronica's final monologue in the film, in which she drunkenly regrets sleeping around while protesting the way men view her as a whore, suggests a dead end in either ideological direction. Free love didn't work for this trio, and promises of marriage and motherhood look just as unlikely to lead to a fulfilling life either. In this way, Eustache was ahead of his time in recognising how deeply a nerdy form of machismo runs in bohemian subcultures. In this regard, he was far more perceptive than many other French New Wave male directors were. If Alexandre were a young man in 2025, for instance, one can see him maybe raving about the truths of Michel Houellebecq novels and listening to the reactionary slacker chic of the Red Scare podcast. And one of Alexandre's friends, that's Jean Pic, goes even further, flirting with fascism in an ironic, not ironic manner that predicts the authoritarian proclivities of a generation of chronically online young men. Several reasons explain why The Mother and the Whore looms so large over Eustache's relatively scant filmography. Yes, his son Boris's refusal to license his father's work for legal release in the US until very recently played a major role in pushing Eustache to the margins. And more important, maybe the fact that he only made one other feature-length narrative film, Mes Petites Amoureuses. Everything else Eustache made is either a documentary or a short, and our culture still tends to view these works as less than major. Had he lived past 1982 and been able to find funding for all the projects he'd conceived, who knows what he might have achieved. And there is a reason why there are no more films from Jean Eustache after 1980, and that's because in 1981 he was partially immobilised in an automobile accident. He killed himself later that year, sadly, by gunshot in his Paris apartment at the age of 42. But he has left for us a legacy of work, and I would suggest to not let this be the only Eustache film that you look at, but do take a look at some of his other short films and documentaries. Now, The Mother and the Whore was restored and remastered in 4K in 2022 by Les Films de Losange with the support of the CNC and the participation of Cinématique Suisse and of Chanel. Image restoration was by l'Immagine Ritrovata Eclair Classics. They were supervised by Jacques Bess and Boris Eustache. That's his son. Sound restoration is by Léon Rousseau-Elie Dispasson with uncompressed mono soundtrack, and it comes as one 4K UHD disc of the film and one Blu-ray with the film and the following special features. A new interview with the actor Françoise Lebrun. New conversation with filmmaker Jean-Pierre Gorin and writer Rachel Kushner. Programme on the film's restoration. Segment from the French television series Pour le Cinéma featuring Lebrun, director Jean Eustache and actors Bernadette Lafont and Jean-Pierre Léaud. Trailer, new English subtitle translations, and of course, as always, an essay written by the critic Lucy Sant. And there's also an introduction to the film itself by the director Jean Eustache. And the cover art, pretty bland, but there it is. It's by Eric Skillman. The Mother and the Whore comes to the collection as a 4K UHD Blu-ray combo and has an aspect ratio of 1:37:1 and with a running time of 218 minutes. The film was released in 1973 and is spine 12:45, out on Tuesday the 14th of January in the US and on Monday the 20th of January in the UK. Next week on Let's Talk Criterion, we'll be featuring a film directed by Richard Pryor, Jojo Dancer, Your Life is Calling, coming to the US and to the UK in 4K UHD. So until then, from me, as always, it's goodbye, and above all, good Criterion viewing.